My wife looked me in the eye at the airport and said, "Whatever you hear, just remember I love you." 5 days later, I found out exactly what she meant. And when she walked back through our front door from Jamaica, I wasn't holding flowers. I was holding divorce papers. My name is Patrick Job. I'm 34 years old, a structural engineer here in Charlotte, North Carolina, the kind of man who spends his days calculating load limits and stress points on buildings that other people trust to keep standing. I've spent 12 years learning how to spot a weakness before it becomes a collapse. I check beams. I check joints. I check the places where pressure quietly builds until something gives. I never thought to check my own marriage the same way. Flora and I had been together 8 years, married for 3. She worked in event planning, always the one holding a room together while everyone else fell apart around her. I used to joke that she planned other people's happiest days for a living, and somehow still managed to make our life together feel like one long celebration. I believed that. I believed it the morning I drove her to the airport for her bachelorette trip to Montego Bay. 5 days with 4 of her closest friends, sun and rum, and the kind of freedom brides are supposed to get before they say their final vows to one man for good. She looked beautiful that morning, sunglasses pushed up into her hair, her carry-on rolling behind her like she couldn't wait to get moving. I remember thinking how lucky I was, watching her laugh at something on her phone, already halfway gone in her mind to the beach. Then, right before she walked through security, she turned back around. She looked at me for a second too long, and she said, "Whatever you hear about this trip, just remember I love you." I laughed. I told her not to worry, that I trusted her completely. She smiled, but it didn't quite reach her eyes, and she didn't laugh with me. She just turned and walked through the doors, and I stood there a moment longer than I needed to, watching the space where she'd been standing, telling myself it was nothing. I had no idea I was watching the beginning of the end. The house felt too quiet that first night. I ordered takeout I barely touched, half-watched a game I couldn't follow, and kept glancing at my phone like it might explain the strange feeling sitting in my chest since the airport. Around 10, a text came in from Priya, Flora's college roommate, someone I'd met maybe 3 times in 8 years. "Call me when you can," it said. Nothing else. No emoji, no explanation, just those 6 words sitting there like a closed door. I called immediately. It rang out. I told myself she was probably just out with friends, that it was nothing, that people don't explain themselves in texts because they're busy living their lives, not because they're hiding something. But some part of me, the part trained to notice hairline cracks before they spread, wouldn't let it go. I thought about 2 years earlier, when I'd found messages between Flora and a coworker that had crossed a line neither of us wanted to name out loud. We called it an emotional affair. We went to counseling for 4 months. She cried in that office more than I'd ever seen her cry in the 8 years I'd known her, and she told me it was over, that she'd never let herself get that lost again. I believed her. I buried it the way you bury a small crack in a foundation you don't want to think about, telling yourself the building's still standing, so it must be fine. I sat in the dark kitchen that night, the only light coming from my phone screen, and I caught my reflection in the window over the sink. I looked older than I remembered looking that morning. I texted Flora good night. She didn't respond for almost 2 hours, and when she finally did, it was just a heart emoji, nothing more. I told myself she was probably just tired from the flight, the sun, the excitement of finally being there with her friends. I turned off the kitchen light and went to bed alone, and for the first time in a long while, sleep didn't come easy. By the second night, Flora's Instagram was full of Jamaica, turquoise water, string lights over an open-air bar, her friends in matching white cover-ups laughing at something just out of frame. I scrolled through it after work, telling myself I was just checking in, just being a supportive husband keeping up with his wife's trip. Then I noticed him. A man in a linen shirt, dark hair, easy smile, standing a little too close in one photo, his hand resting near her waist in another. I told myself it was nothing. Bachelorette parties end up near bachelor parties on beaches like that all the time, strangers crossing paths under string lights and rum punch. But he was in 3 different photos. Always near her. Always angled toward her like he already knew her, not like someone who'd just met her 20 minutes before the photo was taken. I thought about Priya then, and the pattern I'd noticed over the years but never said out loud. She'd been the one pushing Flora toward one last wild night, before our wedding 3 years ago too. The one who always seemed to know exactly which line was fun to dance near and which one you weren't supposed to cross. I wondered, not for the first time, whether Priya knew something about my wife that I didn't. Around midnight, scrolling through the comments under one of the beach videos, I saw something that stopped me cold. An unknown account had written, "Does her husband know?" I refreshed the page 2 seconds later, and it was gone. Deleted. I sat there in the dark, staring at the empty space where the comment had been, my hands cold despite the warm house around me. Someone out there already knew something I didn't. Someone was watching the same videos I was, seeing something I could only sense the edges of. I didn't sleep well again that night, and when I finally did, I dreamed of buildings collapsing in slow motion, floor by floor. Flora called just after midnight, her voice loose and slurred in a way I recognized from years of anniversaries and holiday parties. The good kind of drunk, the kind that made her affectionate and a little too honest. She told me she missed me, that the trip was everything she needed, that she couldn't wait to come home and fall asleep next to me. I smiled into the phone despite everything, feeling that familiar rush of love push back against the doubt that had been building in me for 2 days straight. Then, in the background, I heard a man's voice say her name. Not shouted, not urgent, just familiar. The way you say a name you've said 100 times before. Flora. Easy. Warm. Like he had every right to say it. She went quiet for a beat too long, then laughed too fast and said she had to go. Her friends were waiting. She loved me. Good night. The call ended before I could respond. I sat on the edge of our bed for a long time after that, the phone still warm in my hand, replaying that voice over and over. I thought about my father, and the year I turned 16 when I found out he'd been cheating on my mother for nearly 3 years with a woman from his office. I remembered the specific stillness in my mother's face when she finally said it out loud at our kitchen table, and I remembered promising myself, young and furious and helpless, that I would never be the man who didn't see it coming. That I would notice the cracks. That I would never let myself be blindsided the way my mother had been. I looked at my phone, at Flora's contact photo smiling back at me from a beach vacation 2 years earlier, and for the first time, I let myself consider the possibility that I already knew exactly what was happening 4 states away, and I just hadn't said it out loud yet. Priya finally called me back the next afternoon, 2 days after her first text, and I could hear the hesitation in her voice before she even said hello. She asked how I was doing, made small talk about the weather in Charlotte, stalled in a way that told me everything before she said a single meaningful word. Then she got quiet, and I heard her exhale slowly, like she was steadying herself for something she didn't want to do. "I don't think I should be the one to tell you this," she said. I told her that if she knew something, she needed to say it, that I'd rather hear it from a friend than find out some other way. She told me about the shared photo album the bridal party had set up for the trip, the one where everyone dropped their pictures so no one would miss a moment. Someone had uploaded a photo by accident, she said, a photo that got deleted within minutes but not before a few people saw it. A hotel room. Time-stamped 3 in the morning. Not the room the wedding party had booked. She wouldn't describe what was in the photo beyond that. She said she didn't have the details, only the timestamp and the location, and the sick feeling that had been sitting in her stomach since she'd seen it. I thanked her for calling, my voice steadier than I felt, and hung up before she could hear it crack. I sat with my phone in my hand for a long time afterward, staring at a black screen, thinking about load-bearing walls and how a building doesn't fall all at once. It fails one weakened point at a time, quietly, invisibly, until the day it doesn't hold anymore. I thought about the photo I would never see, the room at 3 in the morning, and I understood, with a certainty that settled into my chest like something physical, that whatever had happened in Jamaica wasn't a mistake made in a single reckless moment. It was a door that had been left open for a long time, waiting for someone to walk through it. I spent that night doing what I do best, investigating, methodically, the way I'd approach a compromised structure. I pulled up the photos of the man in the linen shirt again and started searching, cropping his face, running it through every reverse image tool I could find until I landed on an old profile, half abandoned, photos going back 6 years. And there, in a post from over 2 years earlier, I found her. Flora, tagged, laughing next to him at what looked like a rooftop bar, the caption mentioning a marketing conference in Atlanta. I remembered that conference. She'd told me about it when she got home, exhausted and thrilled about a promotion opportunity that never actually materialized. I remembered believing every word of it. I found 2 more posts after that, spread out over the following 2 years, different cities, different captions, the same easy familiarity between them that don't happen between strangers. Nashville. Then Austin. Every one of them a work trip on my calendar, dates I remembered because I'd missed her those weeks, because I'd been the one holding down our life at home while she was out building her career. I sat in my office at 2 in the morning surrounded by printed screenshots pinned to the corkboard I usually used for project timelines, and I felt something in me go very still and very cold. Not rage yet. Just the quiet, clinical recognition of a pattern finally revealing itself, the kind of pattern you only see once you stop assuming everything is fine. I thought about every time I'd waved her off at the airport over the past 2 years, proud of her, telling her to go build the career she'd worked so hard for. I thought about how many times I'd told our friends how much I trusted her. The corkboard in front of me told a different story, one that had apparently been writing itself for 2 years while I stood in the doorway of our home, waving goodbye, completely unaware I was watching her leave again and again. The text came through the next afternoon while I was still at the office, staring at blueprints I couldn't focus on. We need to talk when I get back. I did something. 6 words. No explanation, no context, nothing to hold on to except the dread that dropped through me the second I read it. I didn't respond right away. I sat at my desk for nearly 20 minutes, the phone face down beside my keyboard, watching the rain start to hit the window in slow, fat drops. Part of me wanted to call her immediately, to demand she tell me everything right then, to skip past the waiting and get straight to whatever truth was coming. But another part of me, the part that had spent the last 4 days quietly gathering evidence like a man reinforcing a wall he already knew was going to fail, understood that I didn't actually need her confession to know what had happened. I already knew. I'd known since the voice in the background of that midnight call. I'd known since the deleted comment. I'd known, if I was honest with myself, since she turned around at airport security and told me to remember she loved me before she'd even done whatever it was she was about to do. I called a coworker that evening, a man who'd gone through his own divorce 2 years earlier, and asked for the name of his attorney. My voice stayed steady through the whole conversation, which surprised me. I think some part of me had already grieved the marriage in the 4 days since Flora left, quietly, alone, the way I process everything, methodically, without much noise. I made the call to the attorney's office before I let myself feel any of it. I didn't respond to Flora's text that night, or the next morning. I let the silence sit exactly where she'd left it, and for the first time since this began, I felt like I was the one in control of what happened next. The attorney and I spoke for nearly an hour, going through what a divorce would look like, the assets, the house, the timeline. Near the end of the call, she mentioned something almost in passing that stopped me completely. She said her office had received an inquiry 6 weeks earlier from someone matching Flora's information, someone who had called asking general questions about divorce proceedings in North Carolina, then never followed up. 6 weeks. That put it well before the Bachelorette trip, weeks before Jamaica was ever on the calendar. I sat with that for a long time after we hung up. Whatever happened on that beach wasn't the beginning of anything. It was a symptom of something that had already been decided, quietly, somewhere I hadn't been paying attention. I thought back over the last year, trying to find the moment I'd missed. The late nights she'd stopped mentioning. The way she'd started keeping her phone face down on the counter, a habit so gradual I'd never registered it as a change. I thought about the conversation we'd had 8 months earlier, when she'd said, almost offhand, that sometimes she felt like she was married to my job instead of to me. I'd laughed it off then, told her I'd try to be better about leaving work at the office, and gone right back to 12-hour days the following week. I hadn't taken her seriously. I hadn't understood that she was telling me something true. I spent that night at our kitchen table signing the papers my attorney had drafted, the same table where we'd eaten breakfast together nearly every morning for 3 years, where she used to read me headlines from her phone while I drank my coffee too fast. I signed my name slowly, deliberately, the pen steady in my hand, even though nothing else in me felt steady at all. Whatever she'd done in Jamaica, I understood now that it wasn't really about Jamaica. It was about a decision she'd already made long before she got on that plane, and I'd just been the last one to find out. Flora walked through the front door 2 days later, suitcase rolling behind her, her skin sunburned across her shoulders, her eyes hollow in a way that had nothing to do with jet lag. She stopped just inside the doorway when she saw me standing in the kitchen, and I watched something shift across her face, some private calculation resolving itself before she'd said a single word. I didn't ask her about the man in the linen shirt. I didn't ask about the hotel room at 3 in the morning, or the 6-week-old inquiry sitting in my attorney's files. I simply slid the papers across the counter between us, the same counter where we'd made coffee together 1,000 mornings, and I watched her eyes drop to them and then back up to me. She didn't cry. That surprised me more than anything else that week. She just stood there, her hands still resting on the handle of her suitcase like she hadn't fully arrived yet, and after a long silence she said, "You already knew, didn't you?" It wasn't really a question about the papers. I could hear that immediately, something underneath her words that suggested there was more sitting behind them than I'd uncovered. Some deeper layer to whatever had happened that I hadn't found yet in all my searching. The suitcase stood between us like a wall neither of us was ready to climb over. The papers sat on the counter, the only thing in the room that had moved. I told her I'd had 6 days to learn things I never wanted to know. I told her I was done guessing at the rest. She looked at me for a long moment, and something in her posture changed, like she was finally deciding to stop protecting whatever she'd been protecting since long before she ever got on that plane to Jamaica. She told me everything, finally, standing in the kitchen with her suitcase still packed. The man wasn't a stranger she'd met on the beach. His name was Christopher, someone she'd reconnected with online almost 2 years earlier, someone from a life she'd had before me that had never fully closed. The work trips, Atlanta, Nashville, Austin, had never really been about conferences. Jamaica wasn't the beginning of anything. It was simply the first time I'd gotten close enough to see what had been happening for 2 years right under the surface of our life together. I told her I didn't need the rest of the details. I already had what I needed. The papers were signed before she ever walked through that door, and nothing she said standing in our kitchen was going to unsign them. She asked for one more conversation, her voice breaking for the first time since she'd come home, but I found I didn't have anything left to offer her. I picked up my keys and walked past her, past the suitcase, out the front door into the early evening air, and I didn't look back the way she had at the airport 6 days earlier. Driving away, I understood that this hadn't broken me the way I expected it to. If anything, it had clarified something I'd been avoiding for years, that I'd spent my whole career learning to find the weak points in other people's buildings while somehow never once thinking to inspect the foundation of my own life. I'd missed the cracks because I hadn't wanted to see them. My phone buzzed as I hit the highway, an unknown number lighting up the screen. The message read, "We need to talk about Flora. It's about more than Jamaica." I looked at it for a long moment, the porch light of our house shrinking in my rearview mirror, and I didn't answer. Not yet. Some structures, I was learning, take longer than 6 days to fully understand. Thanks for watching. Please subscribe, like and share more interesting stories.